Picture this. You're 22 years old, working at a tiny watch repair booth in a struggling shopping mall, and you've just been told your workspace might be closing next month. Your hands shake as you hold a vintage military timepiece that belongs to a customer you've never met, knowing that one wrong move could cost you the last job that connects you to your late father's memory. Then the unthinkable happens. The watch slips from your trembling fingers, and the man standing across from you isn't just any customer. But what if I told you that dropping his watch would end up saving your entire future? What if that moment of absolute terror, that tear rolling down your cheek as you stared at the damaged timepiece, would catch the attention of someone who could change everything? What if your biggest mistake was actually the universe putting you exactly where you needed to be at exactly the right moment with exactly the right person? Have you ever wondered how many life-changing conversations happen in the most ordinary places? How many times does destiny wear the disguise of disaster? How many moments of genuine human connection do we miss because we're too afraid to show our true selves when everything goes wrong? This is the story of Elena Rodriguez, a young woman who discovered that sometimes when your whole world is falling apart, it's actually falling into place in ways you could never imagine. But here's the question that will haunt you throughout this story, the question that might change how you see your own struggles forever. When you make a mistake that could cost you everything, do you run and hide, or do you stand there and face the consequences with complete honesty, even when your voice is shaking and your heart is breaking? If someone walked into your life during your most vulnerable moment and asked you to explain what went wrong, would you have the courage to tell them the truth about your fears, your dreams, and why this moment matters so much to you? If you discovered that your greatest weakness might actually be your greatest strength, that your quiet nature in a loud world might be exactly what someone important has been searching for, would you be brave enough to believe it? If you're ready to discover how one moment of radical honesty can transform not just one life, but an entire community of overlooked dreamers, then settle in, because Elena's journey will remind you that sometimes the people who seem to have the least power are actually the ones who change everything. This story will show you that your authenticity isn't a liability in a world full of performance and pretense. It's your greatest asset, your secret weapon, your ticket to opportunities you never knew existed. And if you've ever felt invisible in a world that celebrates only the loudest voices, if you've ever been told you're too quiet, too sensitive, too different to succeed, then Elena's story isn't just entertainment. It's proof that the universe has been waiting for someone exactly like you to show up and change the game in ways that only you can. Now, let me take you back to that gray Thursday morning in Phoenix, Arizona, when a shy young woman's trembling hands would accidentally unlock a destiny she never saw coming. The morning sun filtered weakly through the dusty skylights of Desert Ridge Shopping Center, casting long shadows across the nearly empty corridors. The mall felt like a ghost town, with more closed storefronts than open ones, their metal security gates pulled down like sleeping eyelids on dreams that had died years ago. Elena Rodriguez moved through this landscape of faded ambitions like a whisper, so quiet and careful that most people didn't even notice her presence. At 22, she had perfected the art of invisibility, learned through years of practice in foster homes where being noticed usually meant being in trouble. Her small frame seemed to shrink even smaller as she navigated the echoing hallways, pushing a cart filled with delicate tools and tiny watch parts that chimed softly with each step. The Desert Ridge Shopping Center had been dying a slow death. For 5 years, ever since the new outdoor shopping complex opened 20 miles south. Store after store had closed, leaving behind empty spaces with optimistic "for lease" signs that grew more faded with each passing month. The food court had dwindled from 12 restaurants to 3, and the central fountain had been turned off. to save money, leaving behind a concrete crater that teenagers used as a skateboarding spot after hours. But tucked away in a corner near what used to be the main entrance, between a struggling phone repair kiosk and a massage chair demonstration, area that never seemed to have any customers, sat Elena's tiny sanctuary. Precision Timepieces was barely larger than a walk-in closet, with a hand-painted wooden sign that her foster father Miguel had made for her 18th birthday, back when he still believed she might actually make something of herself in this world. The booth contained everything that mattered to Elena. A workbench that had belonged to her father, Roberto Rodriguez, killed in Afghanistan when she was 7 years old. His tools, carefully maintained and organized in the same order he had kept them. A magnifying lamp that cast perfect circles of light for examining the intricate gears and springs that most people never realized existed inside their watches. And photographs, small ones tucked into the corners where customers couldn't see them. Her father in his army uniform, smiling beside a Humvee. The last letter he had sent home, promising to teach her everything he knew about fixing timepieces. When he returned, Elena had been working at Precision Timepieces for 3 years, ever since dropping out of Arizona State University, when the foster care system aged her out and the financial aid ran dry. She had been studying engineering, drawn to the same precise thinking that made her father such a gifted watchmaker. But life had other plans, as it often does for young people who don't have family money or influential connections to smooth their path through the world. Miguel Castillo, who owned the watch repair business, had hired Elena not because she had experience, but because he recognized something in her eyes when she first walked into his shop. She had the same look his brother Roberto used to have when working on a complicated mechanism, the same patient focus, the same reverence for craftsmanship that couldn't be taught in any classroom. Miguel was 67 years old, a Vietnam veteran who understood what it meant to lose family to war and to carry their memory forward through the work of your hands. Elena possessed a gift that she had inherited from her father and refined through 3 years of dedicated practice. She could look at a broken watch and somehow understand what it was trying to tell her. The way a second hand stuttered could reveal a problem with the escapement wheel. A crown that felt loose might indicate issues with the stem or the keyless works. She approached each repair like solving a puzzle, patiently disassembling the mechanism until she found the source of the problem. Her reputation had grown quietly, the way all the best reputations do. Customers started driving from across the Phoenix metropolitan area to have Elena work on their watches, not because she was the cheapest option, but because she treated each timepiece like it was the most important thing in the world. She listened when elderly customers told her stories about watches that had belonged to their grandfathers. She smiled when young parents brought in Mickey Mouse watches that their children had tried to wash in the bathtub. She never made anyone feel foolish for caring about something that most people considered obsolete in the age of smartphones. But Elena's world was about to crumble in ways she couldn't prevent or control. 3 weeks earlier, Miguel had received notice from the mall management company that his lease would not be renewed when it expired at the end of the month. Desert Ridge Shopping Center was being sold to a development company that planned to demolish the entire structure and build luxury condominiums. The mall would close permanently in 30 days, and every remaining business would have to find a new location or shut down entirely. Miguel had been searching for alternative locations, but commercial rents in Phoenix had skyrocketed in recent years. The small customer base that had sustained Precision Timepieces in the dying mall wouldn't be enough to cover the costs of a storefront in a thriving shopping district. At 67, with limited savings and no family to help him make the transition, Miguel was facing the possibility that he might have to close the business permanently and retire into poverty. For Elena, the Impending closure represented more than just the loss of a job. Precision timepieces was her connection to her father's memory, the place where she felt closest to the man she barely remembered but desperately wanted to honor. The tools, the workbench, the careful rituals of repair and restoration, these things made her feel like Roberto Rodriguez was still somehow present in her life, guiding her hands as she brought broken timepieces back to life. She had been applying frantically for other jobs, but her resume looked sparse to employers who didn't understand the specialized skills required for watch repair. She had no college degree, no customer service experience in traditional retail, no connections in industries that were actually hiring. The few interviews she had managed to secure had gone poorly, with potential employers commenting that she seemed too quiet, too reserved, not enthusiastic enough for positions that required interaction with the public. Elena had always struggled with what psychologists call social anxiety, though she had never been formally diagnosed or treated. Large groups of people made her feel overwhelmed and invisible. Job interviews felt like performances where she never knew her lines. Small talk with customers was manageable when she was working with her hands, focused on a repair, but the idea of working in a busy office or retail store filled her with a dread that made it hard to breathe. 2 nights earlier, she had written, in the journal she kept hidden under her bed in the tiny studio apartment she rented from Miguel. "Maybe I'm just not meant for the regular world," she had written in careful handwriting. "Maybe some people are meant to work in quiet corners, fixing small things that nobody else notices. Maybe that's enough for a life, even if it doesn't look like success to anyone else." Elena had no way of knowing that her quiet corner was about to intersect with forces that would change everything. She couldn't have imagined that her greatest fear, making a mistake that revealed her inadequacy to the world, was about to become the catalyst for opportunities beyond anything she had ever dared to dream. And she certainly couldn't have predicted that a broken military watch was about to connect her not just to her father's memory, but to a future that would honor his legacy in ways she never thought possible. The universe was preparing to teach Elena Rodriguez that sometimes the most important doors are the ones that open when everything seems to be falling apart. Elena's relationship with Miguel Castillo had begun 3 years earlier on a rainy Tuesday morning when desperation had driven her to knock on the door of every business in Desert Ridge Shopping Center, looking for any kind of work that might help her survive her first month out of foster care. She had been 19 years old, carrying everything she owned in a backpack and a garbage bag, with exactly $47 in her pocket and nowhere to sleep that night. Most business owners had taken one look at her disheveled appearance and mumbled something about not being able to help. But Miguel had seen something different in the young woman who stood dripping rainwater onto his shop floor, clutching a crumpled resume that listed more volunteer work than actual job experience. When she mentioned that her father had been a watchmaker before his deployment to Afghanistan, Miguel's weathered face had softened with recognition and understanding. "Your father," Miguel had said in his careful English, still touched with the accent of his childhood in El Salvador. "He was military." Elena had nodded, unable to trust her voice when talking about Roberto Rodriguez, the man she remembered only in fragments. His laugh when she tried to help him with repairs, sitting on his lap while he explained how gears and springs worked together to measure time, the smell of the special oil he used to lubricate watch movements, the way his fingers moved with impossible delicacy when handling components smaller than grains of rice. Miguel had served 2 tours in Vietnam as a young man, working as a radio operator in conditions that taught him the value of precision and reliability. After the war, he had learned watch repair through a veterans program, discovering that the same steady hands and patient concentration that had kept his unit's communications equipment functioning in the jungle could be applied to the delicate Mechanisms that kept time for civilians. Military men, we understand machines, Miguel had told Elena that first day, gesturing toward the rows of watches waiting for repair. We know that every piece has a purpose, that you must respect the design, work with it instead of fighting against it. Your father, he would have understood this place. Elena had expected to be hired as a general assistant, perhaps cleaning the shop or organizing inventory. Instead, Miguel had spent her first week teaching her to identify different types of watch movements, showing her how to use a loop to examine minute details, explaining the logic behind the arrangement of gears and springs that transform the constant force of a mainspring into the precise measurement of seconds, minutes, and hours. You have the sight, Miguel had told her after watching her successfully identify a problem with a balance wheel that 2 other repair shops had missed. This is not something I can teach. Either you see how the pieces want to fit together, or you do not. You see. Elena's natural talent had emerged gradually, nurtured by Miguel's patient instruction and her own fierce determination to honor her father's memory through the work of her hands. She learned to read the subtle signs that indicated different types of damage. Water damage left distinctive corrosion patterns. Impact damage created specific types of fractures in jewel bearings. Magnetic exposure could demagnetize springs and throw off timing in ways that were invisible to the naked eye, but could be detected through careful testing. More importantly, Elena discovered that she possessed an intuitive understanding of mechanical relationships that allowed her to diagnose problems that more experienced technicians might miss. She could feel when something was wrong with a movement's rhythm, even if all the individual components appeared to be functioning correctly. She understood that watches were not just collections of parts, but integrated systems where everything had to work in perfect harmony. Miguel had gradually increased her responsibilities, teaching her more advanced techniques like mainspring replacement, balance wheel adjustment, and case refinishing. Elena approached each new skill with the methodical patience that she had inherited from her father and refined through years of practice. She made detailed notes about every repair, creating a personal reference library that helped her remember solutions to problems she might encounter again. But Elena's world at Desert Ridge Shopping Center was not without its challenges and conflicts. The mall's management structure had changed hands twice in the 3 years she'd been working there, each new ownership group bringing different priorities and levels of understanding about the businesses they inherited. The current property management company, Southwestern Commercial Properties, was run by a man named Gary Hutchinson, who viewed the remaining tenants not as valued partners, but as obstacles to his vision of redevelopment. Hutchinson was 54 years old, a former real estate agent who had built his property management business by acquiring struggling retail centers and either revitalizing them through aggressive renovations or selling them to developers for demolition. He had no patience for small businesses that couldn't afford significant rent increases, and he had made it clear to the remaining Desert Ridge tenants that they were living on borrowed time. Elena's most immediate workplace challenge came from Brittany Chen, the 26-year-old assistant manager who worked for the mall's administrative office and served as the primary liaison between tenants and ownership. Brittany was everything Elena was not: confident, articulate, comfortable in social situations, and skilled at navigating the politics of business relationships. She had graduated from Arizona State University with a degree in business administration and treated her position at the mall as a stepping stone to more prestigious opportunities. In commercial real estate, Brittany seemed to take particular pleasure in reminding Elena and Miguel that their lease renewal was at the discretion of management, and that businesses that couldn't demonstrate strong revenue growth were unlikely to survive the upcoming transition. She would stop by Precision Timepieces at least twice a week, clipboard in hand, asking pointed questions about customer traffic and sales figures, making notes that she never shared, but that clearly influenced her reports to upper management. The thing about small businesses, Brittany would say while examining Elena's workspace with obvious skepticism, is that they have to evolve with the times. Customers today want convenience and modern technology. They don't want to wait a week for repairs when they can just buy a new watch online for the same price. Elena had never found the words to explain that many of their customers brought in watches that couldn't be replaced with online purchases, vintage pieces inherited from grandparents, military timepieces with sentimental value that far exceeded their monetary worth, high-end Swiss watches that represented significant investments and deserved professional restoration rather than disposal. These relationships and stories seemed to be invisible to Brittany, who evaluated everything in terms of square footage revenue and operational efficiency. What Elena didn't know, what she couldn't have discovered without access to internal company communications, was that Brittany had been systematically undermining small businesses throughout the mall in preparation for the redevelopment project. Her reports consistently understated the value and community impact of businesses like precision timepieces, while emphasizing the challenges and costs associated with maintaining older tenants. Brittany had also been intercepting customer compliments and positive feedback about Elena's work, ensuring that upper management never heard about the reputation the young watchmaker had built throughout the Phoenix area. When customers called the mall office to praise Elena's service or ask about the shop's hours, Brittany would note their comments but omit them from her monthly reports to ownership. In contrast to these workplace challenges, Elena had found unexpected support and friendship from Ruth Williams, a 73-year-old retired teacher who had been bringing her watches to precision timepieces since Miguel first opened the shop 8 years earlier. Ruth was a widow who lived alone in a senior community 15 miles from the mall, but she made the drive every few months to have Elena service her collection of vintage timepieces. Ruth had taught high school English for 42 years before retiring, and she possessed the patient wisdom of someone who had spent decades recognizing potential in young people who didn't always recognize it in themselves. She had been watching Elena's development with the quiet attention of an educator who understood that the most significant growth often happens in students who work hard without seeking attention or recognition. "You remind me of your father," Ruth had told Elena during one of their conversations over the repair counter. Ruth had never met Roberto Rodriguez, but she had listened to Elena's stories about him and recognized the same qualities in his daughter. Not everyone who has talent knows how to use it wisely. Some people are flashy but careless. Others, like you, understand that real skill comes from respecting the work and the people who trust you with important things. Ruth had started leaving. Small encouragements for Elena, handwritten notes tucked discreetly next to her watches when she picked them up. "Your attention to detail made my grandmother's watch keep perfect time again. Thank you for treating my husband's military watch like the treasure it is." Some of the most important work in the world happens quietly, by people who care more about excellence than recognition. Elena had kept every note, storing them in a small wooden box that had belonged to her father. They felt like messages from a world where being quiet and careful was valued rather than criticized, where doing excellent work mattered more than being able to talk about doing excellent work. Ruth had also been married to a veteran, her husband Charles, having served in the Navy during the Korean War. She understood the unique challenges faced by military families, the way deployments and danger created bonds that transcended normal relationships, and the particular grief that came with losing someone to service-related causes. When Elena talked about her father, Ruth listened with the compassion of someone who had experienced similar losses. "Your father's work lives on through your hands," Ruth had told Elena. "Every watch you repair, every customer you help, that's his legacy continuing in the world. Don't let anyone convince you that this work isn't important just because it's quiet. But Ruth's faith in Elena was about to be tested by circumstances that threatened to end the young woman's connection to her father's legacy permanently. The impending closure of Desert Ridge Shopping Center represented more than just economic displacement for Elena. It meant the loss of the workspace where she had learned to honor Roberto Rodriguez's memory through the practice of his craft. Elena had been searching desperately for alternatives, but every option seemed financially impossible or professionally unsuitable. Commercial spaces in established shopping centers required security deposits and monthly rents that exceeded her entire current income. Online watch repair businesses required marketing skills and customer acquisition strategies that Elena had never learned. Mobile repair services demanded levels of customer interaction and self-promotion that felt overwhelming to someone who preferred working in the quiet sanctuary of her father's tools. The rejection letters from potential employers had been accumulating on Elena's kitchen table like evidence of her inadequacy for the modern working world. We're looking for someone with a more dynamic personality for this customer-facing position. Your technical skills are impressive, but we need someone who can contribute to our team environment. While your experience is relevant, we're seeking candidates with stronger communication and presentation abilities. Each rejection reinforced Elena's growing conviction that she was somehow fundamentally unsuited for success in a world that valued networking over craftsmanship, marketing over mastery, personality over precision. She had begun to accept that the closure of precision timepieces might represent the end of her connection to her father's profession, forcing her into whatever minimum wage job would accept someone with her limited social skills and unconventional background. 2 weeks before the fateful Thursday that would change everything, Elena had experienced what felt like her final defeat. She had applied for a position as a jewelry repair technician at a high-end department store, believing that her watchmaking skills might translate to other types of precision work. The interview had gone poorly from the moment she walked into the store's bright, busy environment. The hiring manager had asked Elena to describe her greatest professional accomplishment, and she had struggled to explain the satisfaction of successfully restoring a 1943 military chronograph that had been damaged in a house fire. Her explanation had focused on the technical challenges and the emotional significance of preserving the timepiece for the customer's family, but the hiring manager had seemed unimpressed by her inability to quantify the business value of her work. Our customers expect jewelry technicians to be able to explain services clearly and build relationships that encourage repeat business, the hiring manager had explained. Technical skill is important, but personality and communication abilities are equally crucial for success in our environment. Elena had left that interview knowing that she had failed again, not because she lacked the skills to do the job well, but because she couldn't perform the version of herself that employers seemed to want. That night, she had written in her journal, "Maybe I'm trying to fit into spaces where I don't belong. Maybe some people are meant to work alone, in quiet places, helping one person at a time instead of trying to impress crowds." Elena had no way of knowing that the universe was about to prove her completely wrong about her place in the world, but in a way she could never have anticipated. The hierarchy at Desert Ridge Shopping Center operated like a small, dysfunctional kingdom where power was measured not by competence or compassion, but by proximity to the decision-makers who controlled the fate of every business and employee within its dying walls. At the top of this structure sat Marcus Thompson, a 49-year-old CEO who had never set foot inside the mall he was planning to demolish, viewing it only as numbers on spreadsheets and potential square footage for luxury development. Thompson had built his fortune by identifying underperforming retail properties in growing metropolitan areas, acquiring them at below-market prices, and either transforming them into high-end shopping destinations or selling them to residential developers for maximum profit. He approached every property acquisition with the cold calculation of someone who saw buildings as investment vehicles rather than communities where real people worked and shopped and built relationships over years of shared experience. Desert Ridge Shopping Center had appeared on Thompson's radar because of its prime location in a rapidly gentrifying area of Phoenix, surrounded by new housing developments that attracted young professionals with significant disposable income. The mall itself was failing, but the 40-acre site offered tremendous potential for mixed-use development that could generate returns far exceeding what the current struggling retail tenants could ever provide. Thompson had assigned the Desert Ridge project to Gary Hutchinson, his most aggressive property manager, with clear instructions to expedite the transition process and minimize any complications that might delay demolition and redevelopment. Hutchinson understood that his own career advancement depended on executing Thompson's vision efficiently and profitably, regardless of the impact on existing tenants who had built their livelihoods within the mall's walls. Hutchinson embodied everything that Elena found intimidating about the business world. He was loud where she was quiet, aggressive where she was careful, focused on immediate results where she valued patient craftsmanship. During his monthly visits to inspect the property, Hutchinson would stride through the mall corridors like a general surveying conquered territory, making notes about which spaces could be reconfigured for maximum development value. Elena had encountered Hutchinson only twice during her 3 years at Precision Timepieces, but both interactions had left her feeling diminished and invisible. He spoke to Miguel as if the older man were a problem to be solved, rather than a human being who had built a business through decades of dedicated service. He looked at Elena's workspace like it was wasted square footage, rather than a place where careful hands restored precious timepieces to working condition. "The future of retail is experiential," Hutchinson had announced during his most recent visit, gesturing dismissively at the rows of watches waiting for repair. "Customers want entertainment, dining, lifestyle experiences. They don't want to wait around for old-fashioned services that take days or weeks to complete." Hutchinson's vision for the redeveloped property included upscale restaurants, boutique fitness studios, and luxury residential units that would attract exactly the kind of affluent customers who didn't need to have their watches repaired because they could afford to replace them whenever necessary. He saw businesses like Precision Timepieces as relics of an obsolete economic model that prioritized relationships and craftsmanship over efficiency and profit margins. What made Elena's situation even more precarious was her complete lack of understanding about the political dynamics that determined her professional fate. She had no idea that Brittany Chen was actively working to ensure that small businesses like Precision Timepieces would be portrayed as obstacles to progress rather than valued community resources. Elena's natural inclination toward privacy and her discomfort with self-promotion meant that she never advocated for herself or her work in ways that might have influenced the decision-making process. Brittany had been systematically building a case against the mall's remaining small businesses, documenting every customer complaint, every maintenance issue, every sign of decline that could justify accelerating the redevelopment timeline. Her reports to upper management emphasized the costs and complications associated with maintaining older tenants, while minimizing any mention of their community value or customer loyalty. Elena had become one of Brittany's primary targets, not because of any personal animosity, but because precision timepieces represented everything that Brittany's business education had taught her to eliminate from modern retail environments. The watch repair booth generated modest revenue, required specialized knowledge that couldn't be easily replaced, and served a customer base that valued tradition and craftsmanship over convenience and innovation. Small businesses like that watch repair place are holding back the entire property, Brittany had written in a recent report to Hutchinson. They attract older customers who don't shop at other stores, they require specialized maintenance support, and they create an outdated image that discourages the kind of upscale tenants we need to attract for successful redevelopment. Brittany's assessment failed to account for Elena's growing reputation among collectors and enthusiasts who drove significant distances to have their timepieces serviced at precision timepieces. These customers often spent considerable money at other mall businesses while waiting for repairs to be completed, and many had discovered favorite restaurants or shops through their visits to Elena's workspace. But these economic relationships were invisible to someone who evaluated success only through immediate revenue metrics and demographic profiles. Elena's situation was made more complex by her complete ignorance of the forces working against her. She had no access to the reports that Brittany submitted to management, no understanding of the development plans that had already been approved for the property, and no knowledge of the political strategies that determined which businesses would survive the transition and which would be sacrificed for the greater good of maximizing investment returns. Miguel had tried to shield Elena from the worst of the uncertainty, but at 67 years old, he was facing his own financial pressures that made it impossible for him to provide the kind of security and mentorship that might have helped Elena navigate the challenges ahead. His savings were limited, his own lease was expiring, and the costs associated with relocating the business exceeded what he could afford on a fixed income that depended entirely on the modest profits from watch repairs. The one bright spot in Elena's professional environment came from her relationship with Ruth Williams, who had been watching the young woman's development with the protective instincts of a teacher who recognized exceptional potential in a struggling student. Ruth had spent 42 years in public education, where she had learned to identify young people who possessed rare gifts, but lacked the confidence or connections necessary to advocate for themselves effectively. Ruth understood that Elena's quiet nature and technical focus represented strengths rather than limitations, but she also recognized that these qualities made the young woman vulnerable in environments that rewarded self-promotion over substance. She had been looking for ways to help Elena understand her own value and develop the professional relationships that might protect her from the economic forces threatening to displace her from the work she loved. "You have something that can't be taught," Ruth had told Elena during one of their conversations over the repair counter. "But you also need to understand that talent alone isn't always enough in this world. Sometimes the most gifted people need advocates who can help others see what makes them special." Ruth had been considering ways to connect Elena with collectors and enthusiasts who might appreciate her skills, but she hadn't yet found the right opportunity to make those introductions. She understood that Elena's shyness made networking events and professional gatherings feel overwhelming, so any help would need to come through natural circumstances rather than forced interactions. Elena's personal life reflected the same patterns of isolation and self-reliance that characterized her professional existence. She lived alone in a small studio apartment that Miguel helped her afford by paying slightly above market wages for her work at precision timepieces. The apartment was sparse but organized, containing her father's tools, her small collection of books about horology and engineering, and the wooden box where she kept Ruth's encouraging notes. Elena had no close friends her own age, partly because Her work schedule and interests didn't align with typical social activities for people in their early 20s, and partly because her experiences in foster care had taught her to be cautious about trusting new people with her emotional vulnerabilities. She spent most of her free time reading technical manuals, practicing advanced repair techniques, or walking through the quiet neighborhoods near her apartment while thinking about problems she was trying to solve at work. Her social media presence was minimal, consisting mainly of a Facebook account that she rarely updated and an Instagram profile with fewer than 50 followers, most of whom were customers who had found her through word-of-mouth recommendations. Elena had never learned to present herself effectively online, and the idea of promoting her work through digital marketing felt both overwhelming and somehow dishonest to someone who believed that excellent craftsmanship should speak for itself. Elena's financial situation was precarious in ways that would have been invisible to casual observers. She earned enough to cover her basic living expenses, but she had no savings account, no credit history that would qualify her for business loans, and no family connections that could provide emergency support if her income disappeared suddenly. The impending closure of Desert Ridge Shopping Center represented not just professional displacement, but potential homelessness and complete disconnection from the work that gave her life meaning and purpose. Elena had been applying for jobs with increasing desperation as the mall's closure date approached, but every interview reinforced her growing conviction that she was fundamentally unsuited for employment in environments that valued personality over precision. The customer service positions required levels of social engagement that exhausted her within hours. The technical jobs demanded credentials and educational backgrounds that she couldn't provide. The retail opportunities seemed designed for people who could sell products enthusiastically rather than repair them meticulously. 3 days before the encounter that would change everything, Elena had received another rejection letter that perfectly captured the impossible bind she found herself facing. A jewelry store had acknowledged her technical qualifications, but explained that they needed someone who could build customer relationships that drive repeat business and referrals. A watch repair shop across town had praised her skills, but noted that they required employees who could represent the business effectively at trade shows and networking events. Elena had begun to accept that the closure of precision timepieces might represent the end of her connection to her father's profession. She had started researching completely different career paths, looking into warehouse work, data entry positions, and other jobs that might allow her to work quietly without requiring the kind of interpersonal skills that seemed to disqualify her from every opportunity related to her actual expertise and passion. That Tuesday night, Elena had written in her journal with the resignation of someone who had stopped fighting against circumstances she couldn't control. "Maybe I've been trying to force something that wasn't meant to be," she had written. "Maybe losing this job is the universe telling me to find a different path, even if I don't understand where it leads or whether it will make me happy." Elena had no way of knowing that the universe was actually preparing to offer her opportunities beyond anything she had ever imagined. But through circumstances so unexpected and initially terrifying that they would test every assumption she had made about her place in the world and her capacity for success in environments she had never dared to enter. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of grey, overcast sky that made Desert Ridge Shopping Center feel even more abandoned than usual. Elena had been awake since 4:30, lying in her narrow bed and staring at the ceiling, while her mind raced through all the things that could go wrong during what might be one of her final weeks at Precision Timepieces. The mall's closure was now just 18 days away, and she still hadn't found alternative employment or figured out how she would survive financially once her connection to her father's profession was severed forever. Elena arrived at work 30 minutes early, as she always did, using the quiet time before the mall officially opened to organize her workspace and review the repairs scheduled for completion that day. The morning light filtering through the mall's dusty skylights cast everything in muted tones that matched her somber mood as she unlocked the security gate that protected precision timepieces during overnight hours. Miguel had called in sick the previous evening, his voice hoarse, with what sounded like the flu that had been circulating through the senior community where he lived. At 77 years old, Miguel was more susceptible to illnesses that younger people might shake off easily, and Elena had insisted that he stay home and rest rather than risk his health by coming to work in his weakened condition. Working alone at the shop always made Elena feel more vulnerable to the judgment of customers who might question whether someone so young could possibly possess the expertise necessary to handle their precious timepieces. But it also gave her the freedom to work at her own pace, without the pressure of maintaining conversation or explaining her techniques to someone who might not understand the subtle complexities of mechanical restoration. Elena's first task of the morning was to complete the repair of a 1967 Omega Speedmaster that belonged to Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a retired physician who had inherited the watch from her father and wanted it restored to working condition for her grandson's college graduation. The mainspring had lost its tension over the decades, and Elena had spent the previous afternoon carefully installing a replacement while ensuring that all the other components remained in their original configuration. As Elena worked on the final adjustments to the Speedmaster's movement, she found herself thinking about the stories that customers shared when they brought their watches for repair. Dr. Hernandez had explained that her father had worn the Omega during his residency at a Phoenix hospital in the 1970s, relying on its precision timing during medical procedures, where seconds could mean the difference between life and death. Now she wanted to pass that legacy of reliability and excellence to the next generation of her family. These stories were what made Elena's work feel meaningful rather than simply technical. Every watch contained history, memory, and emotional connections that transcended the monetary value of the timepiece itself. When Elena restored a watch to working condition, she wasn't just fixing a mechanism. She was preserving relationships, honoring legacies, and enabling future generations to carry forward the traditions and values that their families had preserved through carefully maintained heirlooms. Elena had just finished testing the Speedmaster's accuracy when she heard footsteps approaching the shop. It was still 20 minutes before the mall officially opened to the public, so she assumed the visitor must be another tenant or perhaps a maintenance worker making early rounds through the building. She looked up to see a man in his late 30s, walking purposefully toward her workspace, carrying a small leather case that suggested he had brought a watch for repair. The man was tall and lean, with graying hair at his temples, and the kind of weathered face that spoke of time spent outdoors, in challenging conditions. He wore dark jeans, a simple grey sweater, and well-worn leather boots that looked both expensive and practical. Something about his bearing suggested military background, the way he moved with efficient precision and maintained perfect posture even while walking casually through the mall's corridors. "Excuse me," the man said as he approached Elena's workspace, his voice carrying a slight southern accent that was warm but controlled. "I know you're not officially open yet, but I'm hoping you might be able to help me with something. I have a watch that's been giving me trouble, and I was told you're the best person in Phoenix for this kind of work." Elena felt her pulse quicken at the compliment, though she wasn't sure who might have recommended her services to someone she had never met. She set down her tools and stood to greet the customer, wiping her hands nervously on the small towel she kept beside her workbench. "Of course," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of problem are you experiencing?" The man opened his leather case to reveal a watch that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. It was a 1943 A11 military chronograph, the kind issued to American pilots during World War II. The case was battered and scarred from decades of use, but Elena could see immediately that this was an authentic wartime timepiece rather than a modern reproduction. The dial had developed the distinctive patina that came from age and exposure, and the hands showed the subtle irregularities that indicated original components rather than later replacements. "This belonged to my grandfather," the man explained, lifting the watch carefully from its case. "He was a bomber pilot in the Pacific Theater. The watch stopped working about 6 months ago, and I've been told by 3 different repair shops that it's beyond saving. Too many original parts are damaged or missing, they said, but this watch means everything to my family, and I'm hoping someone with your reputation might be able to work some magic." Elena accepted the watch with trembling hands, immediately understanding the weight of responsibility that came with handling such a precious family heirloom. Military watches from World War II were extraordinarily rare, especially ones that had been maintained in reasonable condition through 8 decades of family ownership. The fact that this customer was willing to entrust her with something so irreplaceable spoke to a level of faith in her abilities that both honored and terrified her. "May I examine it more closely?" Elena asked, already reaching for her jewelers. Loop and the specialized tools she would need to assess the watch's condition. "Please," the man said, "take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Elena secured the watch in her repair vise and began the delicate process of opening the case to examine the movement inside. The back of the case had been engraved, with her customer's grandfather's name, rank and service number, along with a date from 1943 that probably marked either his deployment or the completion of his training. As Elena worked to remove the case back, she could feel the customer watching her with the intense attention of someone whose emotional investment in the outcome far exceeded any monetary considerations. The movement inside the watch revealed exactly the kinds of problems that Elena had expected to find. The mainspring was completely broken, its metal having developed stress fractures that prevented it from maintaining tension. Several of the gear wheels showed wear patterns that indicated decades of use without proper maintenance. The balance wheel was functioning, but Elena could see that its timing would need significant adjustment to achieve acceptable accuracy. More challenging was the discovery that someone had attempted previous repairs using modern replacement parts that were incompatible with the original 1940s movement. The crown and stem had been replaced with components that didn't quite fit properly, creating problems with the winding mechanism that had probably contributed to the mainspring failure. Elena would need to source authentic vintage parts or fabricate custom components that matched the original specifications exactly. "The good news," Elena said, looking up from her examination, "is that the core movement is intact and the damage is repairable. The challenging news is that it's going to require some very specialized work to restore it properly." Elena began, explaining the technical problems she had identified, describing each issue in language that was precise but accessible to someone without watchmaking expertise. She talked about the need to locate authentic vintage parts, the process of fabricating custom components when originals weren't available, and the delicate work of adjusting the timing mechanism to achieve the kind of accuracy that military pilots had depended on during combat missions. As Elena spoke, she found herself becoming more animated and confident than she ever felt during normal social interactions. When discussing her craft, the words came easily because she was sharing knowledge that she had mastered through years of patient study and practice. She wasn't trying to impress anyone or perform a version of herself that didn't feel authentic. She was simply explaining work that she understood better than almost anything else in the world. The customer listened with the focused attention of someone who genuinely wanted to understand both the challenges and the possibilities involved. In restoring his grandfather's watch, he asked thoughtful questions about the repair process, the availability of vintage parts, and the likelihood of achieving reliable long-term performance from a movement that was approaching its 80th birthday. "How long do you think the restoration would take?" he asked. Elena considered the question carefully, thinking through each stage of the repair process and the time required to locate the specialized parts she would need. "Probably 4 to 6 weeks," she said. "Maybe longer if I have trouble sourcing authentic components. I could rush the work and complete it faster, but a watch like this deserves to be restored properly, even if that takes additional time." "Take as long as you need," the customer said immediately. "Quality matters more than speed for something like this." Elena felt a surge of relief and gratitude for a customer who understood that excellent craftsmanship couldn't be hurried or compromised for the sake of convenience. She began explaining her approach to the restoration, describing how she would document each step of the process, photograph the movement before and after each stage of work, and maintain detailed records that would help future watchmakers understand exactly what had been done to preserve the timepiece. As Elena talked about her restoration philosophy, she became completely absorbed in the technical and historical aspects of the project. She explained how World War II military watches had been built to different standards than civilian timepieces, designed for reliability under extreme conditions rather than luxury or aesthetic appeal. She described the engineering challenges involved in creating accurate timekeeping mechanisms that could function reliably during high-altitude flights, extreme temperature variations, and the physical stresses of aerial combat. "Your grandfather's watch represents some of the finest mechanical engineering of its era," Elena said, her voice growing stronger with enthusiasm for the subject. "These timepieces were built by craftsmen who understood that soldiers' lives might depend on accurate timing. Every component was designed and manufactured to standards that most modern watches can't match." The customer smiled at Elena's obvious passion for her craft. "You really love this work, don't you?" "More than anything," Elena replied, without hesitation. "Every watch tells a story, but military timepieces like your grandfather's carry histories that most people can't imagine. When I restore a watch like this, I'm not just fixing a mechanism. I'm preserving a connection to someone who served his country and trusted his life to the precision of what he wore on his wrist." Elena was so focused on discussing the restoration project that she had completely forgotten about her nervousness around new customers. She was simply sharing her expertise with someone who appreciated the significance of the work and understood the patience required to achieve excellent results. For the first time in weeks, Elena felt like herself rather than an inadequate version of what she thought other people wanted her to be. But Elena's moment of confidence was about to be shattered by circumstances entirely beyond her control. As she reached across her workbench to retrieve a reference book that contained specifications for 1940s military movements, her elbow caught the edge of the small metal tray where she had placed several tiny screws from the Omega Speedmaster. "Repair." The tray tilted, and the screws began rolling toward the edge of her workbench. Elena's instinctive reaction was to catch the falling screws before they could scatter across the floor and potentially be lost forever. Dr. Hernandez's Speedmaster couldn't be reassembled without every single component, and replacing lost screws in a vintage Omega would require ordering parts that might take weeks to arrive and cost more than the customer could afford to pay. As Elena lunged forward to catch the falling screws, her sudden movement caused her arm to bump against the customer's grandfather's watch, which she had left lying on the workbench while explaining the restoration process. The A11 chronograph slipped from its position and fell toward the concrete floor of the mall corridor. Elena managed to catch the watch just before it hit the ground, but not before the crystal face struck the sharp metal edge of her tool cabinet. The impact created a hairline crack that ran diagonally across the dial, marring the pristine condition of a timepiece that had survived 8 decades of careful preservation by 3 generations of the same family. Elena stared at the damaged watch in her trembling hands, feeling her heart stop as she realized the magnitude of what had just happened. The crystal on a 1943 military chronograph couldn't be replaced with a modern component. It would require sourcing an authentic vintage part that might cost thousands of dollars and take months to locate. Even worse, the crack might have damaged the dial underneath, creating restoration challenges that could exceed the value of the watch itself. "Oh no," Elena whispered, her voice breaking as tears began forming in her eyes. "Oh no, oh no, oh no." The customer stood quietly, watching Elena's reaction with an expression that she couldn't read through her panic and shame. Elena looked up at him, knowing that her face reflected the complete devastation she felt at having damaged something so precious and irreplaceable. "I am so sorry," Elena said, her voice shaking with the effort of holding back tears. "This is entirely my fault. I wasn't being careful enough. I can pay for the damage, I don't know how, but I'll find a way. I'll work extra hours, I'll take on additional jobs, I'll figure out how to make this right." The customer studied Elena's face for a long moment, taking in her obvious distress and the genuine remorse that she was making no effort to hide or minimize. Finally, he asked a question that Elena hadn't expected. "What were you trying to catch when the watch fell?" Elena looked down at the scattered screws around her feet, tiny metal components that most people wouldn't even notice, but that represented hours of careful work and a customer's trust in her ability to restore their family heirloom. "The screws from Mrs. Hernandez's watch," Elena said quietly. "She's a retired doctor, and this Speedmaster belonged to her father. She wants to give it to her grandson for his college graduation. She saved for months to afford the restoration, and if I lost any of those screws, it could delay the repair by weeks." The customer nodded slowly, processing Elena's explanation. "So you were trying to save someone else's repair while working on mine?" "That doesn't excuse what I did," Elena said quickly, her voice filled with self-recrimination. "I should have been more careful. I should have secured your watch properly before handling anything else. This is my fault, and I take full responsibility." The customer was quiet for so long that Elena began to wonder if he was calculating the cost of the damage or considering whether to report her incompetence to Miguel or the mall management. She imagined losing her job not just because of the mall closure, but because of her own carelessness with a customer's irreplaceable family treasure. Finally, the customer spoke again. "Can the crystal be repaired?" Elena forced herself to examine the damage with professional objectivity rather than emotional panic. The crack was visible but relatively small, running from about 2 o'clock to 7 o'clock on the dial. The crystal was still structurally sound, and Elena could see that the dial underneath appeared to be undamaged. "Yes," Elena said, relief evident in her voice. "The movement is completely unaffected, and the dial appears intact. A replacement crystal can be fitted, but it will need to be an authentic 1940s component to maintain the watch's historical accuracy. Those are expensive and difficult to source." "How expensive?" Elena's stomach dropped as she mentally calculated the cost of an authentic World War II chronograph crystal in good condition. Probably between $800 and $1,200, depending on condition and availability, plus the labor for installation and recalibration. The customer remained silent for several seconds that felt like hours to Elena. She waited for anger, for demands for immediate payment, for threats of legal action that would destroy any possibility of financial recovery from this catastrophic mistake. Instead, the customer asked her something that changed everything. "What's your name?" Elena Rodriguez." "Elena, I want to ask you something important, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you love this work?" The question caught Elena completely off guard. Through her fear and shame about damaging the watch, she had to pause and consider what he was really asking. "Yes," she said quietly, "more than anything in the world." "Why?" Elena looked down at the damaged watch in her hands, then at the scattered components of Dr. Hernandez's Speedmaster, then back at the customer's unexpectedly patient expression. Despite everything that had just gone wrong, despite the financial catastrophe she had created for herself, Elena found herself answering with complete honesty. "Because these watches carry pieces of people's lives," she said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke from her heart rather than her fear. "Every timepiece tells a story about someone who mattered, someone who trusted their most important moments to the accuracy of what they wore on their wrist. When I restore a watch, I'm not just fixing a mechanism, I'm preserving connections between generations, honoring the memories of people who trusted these instruments with their lives and their legacies." Elena paused, looking directly at the customer for the first time since the accident. "Your grandfather's watch survived World War II, probably timed bombing runs and navigation calculations that brought him home safely from missions where other men didn't return. When I work on something like that, I'm touching history, preserving a piece of courage and sacrifice that deserves to keep ticking for future generations." The customer smiled for the first time since arriving at Elena's workspace. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." Elena stared at him, confused by his response and uncertain what his words might mean for her future or the consequences she would face for her catastrophic mistake. She had no way of knowing that this seemingly simple customer interaction was about to reveal connections and opportunities that would transform not just her own life, but her understanding of how the universe sometimes uses our greatest failures to unlock destinies we never dared to imagine. The silence that followed Elena's heartfelt explanation seemed to stretch forever, filled only by the distant sounds of the mall's ventilation system and the occasional echo of footsteps from early arriving employees in other parts of the building. Elena stood frozen, still holding the damaged watch, waiting for the customer's anger or disappointment or demands for immediate compensation that would destroy any possibility of recovering from this catastrophic mistake. Instead, David Mitchell reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, setting it gently on Elena's workbench beside the scattered tools and watch components. Elena glanced down at the card and felt her world tilt in a way that had nothing to do with her anxiety about the damaged timepiece. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. David Mitchell, Chief Executive Officer, Desert Ridge Development Corporation, she read aloud, her voice barely audible. The company name meant nothing to Elena initially, but as her mind processed the implications, she began to understand that she had just damaged the watch of someone whose opinion could affect far more than just this single repair transaction. Desert Ridge Development, Elena repeated slowly, looking up at David with growing comprehension and horror. "You own this mall." David nodded, watching Elena's expression carefully as she realized that her customer wasn't just someone who could complain to Miguel or leave negative reviews online. He was someone who controlled the future of the shopping center where she worked, someone whose decisions could affect whether precision timepieces survived the remaining weeks before the scheduled closure. Elena felt her legs grow weak as the full magnitude of her situation became clear. She had not only damaged an irreplaceable family heirloom belonging to a complete stranger, she had damaged an irreplaceable family heirloom belonging to the person who could determine whether she finished her final weeks of employment or was terminated immediately for incompetence and carelessness. "Oh, God," Elena whispered, sinking onto the stool behind her workbench. "I've ruined everything." David watched Elena's reaction with the same careful attention he had once applied to evaluating soldiers under stress. Some people became defensive when faced with overwhelming pressure, making excuses or shifting blame to protect themselves from consequences they couldn't control. Others became paralyzed by fear, unable to think clearly or take constructive action when decisive leadership was most necessary. Elena's response revealed a third pattern that David had learned to recognize in his best personnel. She was processing the full scope of the challenge she faced without losing sight of her fundamental responsibilities or abandoning her commitment to doing the right thing, regardless of personal cost. "Mr. Mitchell," Elena said, forcing herself to look directly at him despite her fear and embarrassment, "I understand that this situation is much more serious than I initially realized, but my commitment to making this right hasn't changed. I will find a way to pay for the crystal replacement and any other costs associated with restoring your grandfather's watch to perfect condition." David was impressed by Elena's ability to maintain her professional composure even after discovering that her customer was also her ultimate employer. Many people would have begun apologizing frantically or making promises they couldn't keep, but Elena was focusing on practical solutions rather than emotional responses to circumstances she couldn't change. "Elena," David said, settling into the customer chair across from her workbench, "I want you to set aside your concerns about the watch for a few minutes. I have some questions for you, and I'd appreciate honest answers." Elena nodded, though she couldn't imagine what questions about her work or her background could possibly matter to someone who probably viewed her as a liability to be eliminated rather than an employee worth retaining. "How long have you been working here?" David asked. 3 years, Elena replied, "since I was 19, and before that." Elena hesitated, uncertain how much personal information she should share with someone who might be evaluating her suitability for continued employment. But David's manner was more curious than judgmental, and she had already committed herself to complete honesty about the watch repair situation. "I was in college for 1 year, Elena said. Arizona State University, studying mechanical engineering. But I had to drop out when my foster care benefits ended, and I couldn't afford tuition plus living expenses." David made a mental note about Elena's educational background and the financial pressures that had forced her to leave school. Engineering students who succeeded in their first year typically possessed exactly the kind of analytical thinking and mathematical aptitude that supported excellence in precision mechanical work. "What made you interested in engineering?" David asked. "My father," Elena said, her voice softening with the warmth that always appeared when she talked about Roberto Rodriguez. "He was a watchmaker before he enlisted in the army. He used to tell me that engineering was just problem-solving on a larger scale, figuring out how to make complex systems work together to achieve specific goals." David recognized the connection between Elena's father's military service and her current work, but he was also hearing something in her voice that suggested deeper motivations than simply honoring family traditions. "Do you miss school?" David asked. "Engineering school, I mean." Elena considered the question carefully. She had been so focused on surviving financially and maintaining her connection to her father's profession that she rarely allowed herself to think about the academic opportunities she had been forced to abandon. "Sometimes," Elena admitted, I loved the theoretical aspects of mechanical systems, understanding how forces and materials and design principles work together to create solutions for real-world problems. But I also discovered that I prefer working with my hands, seeing immediate results from careful attention to detail. David was beginning to understand that Elena possessed a rare combination of theoretical knowledge and practical skill that could be valuable in contexts far beyond watch repair. Engineering students who also possessed natural mechanical aptitude were uncommon, and those who could work with precision on complex systems were even rarer. "Tell me about your customers," David said. "What kinds of people bring watches to you?" "If for repair." Elena's expression brightened as she shifted to discussing the aspect of her work that she found most meaningful. "All kinds of people," she said. "Collectors who own vintage timepieces worth more than most people's cars, elderly customers who inherited watches from family members and want to keep them working for future generations, young parents whose children have damaged, inexpensive watches that have sentimental value." Elena paused, thinking about the stories that customers shared when they entrusted her with their precious timepieces. "Military families," she continued. "Veterans who own watches that survive deployments, family members who want to restore timepieces that belong to people who didn't come home. Those are the repairs that matter most to me." David felt a familiar recognition as Elena described working with military families and veterans. Her understanding of the emotional significance attached to military timepieces suggested personal experience rather than simply professional knowledge. "Your father served?" David asked, though he had already guessed the answer from Elena's previous comments. "Afghanistan," Elena said quietly. "He was killed when I was 7. I don't remember much about him, but I remember watching him work on watches and the way he explained that every component had to be perfect because people trusted their lives to accurate timing." David understood immediately why Elena approached her work with such reverence and attention to detail. She wasn't just fixing mechanical devices, she was honoring her father's memory and preserving connections between military families and the timepieces that represented service, sacrifice, and survival. "Elena," David said, his tone becoming more serious, "I need to tell you something about why I'm here today. This visit wasn't just about getting my grandfather's watch repaired." Elena looked at him with growing apprehension, uncertain what his words might mean, but sensing that her situation was about to become even more complicated than she had realized. "I've been studying this mall for months," David continued, "trying to understand why some businesses succeed while others struggle, what kinds of services provide real value to customers, and how we might create sustainable economic opportunities for skilled professionals who deserve better than what the current marketplace is offering." Elena listened with increasing confusion. She had expected to be fired, or at least severely reprimanded for damaging his watch, but David was talking about business analysis and economic opportunities in ways that seemed completely unrelated to her current crisis. "Your name keeps appearing in my research," David explained. "Not just customer reviews or online recommendations, but conversations with collectors, jewelers, and other professionals who understand what excellent craftsmanship looks like. People drive from across Arizona to have you work on their watches." Elena had never realized that her reputation extended beyond the immediate Phoenix area, and she certainly hadn't known that anyone was studying her work from a business perspective. The idea that someone like David Mitchell would have been researching her expertise felt both flattering and intimidating. "I've also been investigating the larger context of your work environment," David continued. "The mall's financial situation, the challenges facing small businesses that provide specialized services, and the opportunities that might exist for creating new models that support traditional crafts in modern economic environments." Elena was beginning to suspect that David's visit involved considerations that went far beyond watch repair, but she couldn't imagine what someone who owned commercial real estate would want from someone whose entire professional world was contained within a booth smaller than most people's bathrooms. "Elena, I'm going to ask you a question that might seem unrelated to our current situation," David said. "If you could design your ideal work environment, what would it look like?" The question caught Elena completely off guard. She had spent so much time worrying about losing her current job that she had never allowed herself to imagine what better opportunities might look like if they actually existed. "I don't understand," Elena said. "Are you asking what I would change?" "About working here, I'm asking you to think bigger than that," David replied. "Imagine you had unlimited resources and complete creative control. What kind of workspace would allow you to do your best work? What kinds of customers would you want to serve? What would success look like if you could define it entirely on your own terms?" Elena stared at David, uncertain whether this was some kind of test or whether he was genuinely interested in her thoughts about professional possibilities she had never dared to consider. But his expression was patient and encouraging, suggesting that he actually wanted to hear her honest response, rather than whatever answer she thought he might prefer. "I would want a proper workshop," Elena said slowly, her voice growing stronger, as she allowed herself to imagine possibilities beyond her current limitations. Not just a booth, but a real space with proper lighting, professional-grade equipment, and room for customers to watch me work if they wanted to understand what was involved in restoring their timepieces. David nodded encouragingly, and Elena found herself continuing with growing enthusiasm. "I would want to teach people about mechanical horology," Elena said. "Not just repair watches, but help customers understand how these mechanisms work, why proper maintenance matters, and how to care for timepieces so they can be passed down through generations." Elena paused, thinking about the broader impact she might have if she weren't limited by space, resources, and the constraints of working in a dying shopping mall. "I would want to work with veterans and military families," Elena continued. "People who understand why precision matters, who appreciate craftsmanship, and who need someone they can trust with timepieces that represent more than just monetary value." David was impressed by Elena's vision, which demonstrated both ambition and genuine understanding of how her skills could serve markets that were currently underserved by conventional retail businesses. "What about business relationships?" David asked. "Would you want to work independently, or would you be interested in partnerships that could provide resources and support while allowing you to focus on the work you love?" Elena considered the question carefully. Her experiences with foster care and economic uncertainty had taught her to value independence and self-reliance, but she was also beginning to understand that some opportunities might require collaboration with people who possessed complementary skills and resources. "I think," Elena said thoughtfully, "that I would want to work with people who understood that excellent craftsmanship takes time, that building customer relationships matters more than maximizing short-term profits, and that some kinds of value can't be measured simply by looking at financial statements." David smiled, recognizing that Elena had just described exactly the kind of business philosophy that had been guiding his approach to property development since returning from military service. "Elena," David said, "I want to make you an offer. But first, I need you to understand that this conversation has nothing to do with the damage to my grandfather's watch. That was an accident, and accidents happen to everyone who does demanding work under pressure." Elena looked at him skeptically, unable to believe that someone in his position would simply dismiss damage to an irreplaceable family heirloom. "More importantly," David continued, "your response to that accident showed me exactly what I needed to see about your character and your potential for handling challenges that are much larger than watch repair." Elena waited, uncertain what David might be planning to propose, but beginning to sense that her entire future was about to change in ways she couldn't predict or control. "I want to offer you a partnership," David said. "Not just a job, but an opportunity to create the kind of workshop and business relationships you just described, supported by resources that would allow you to focus entirely on developing your craft and serving customers who appreciate what you can offer." Elena stared at David, certain that she had misunderstood something fundamental about his proposal. People like her didn't receive partnership offers from successful business owners, especially not after making catastrophic mistakes that demonstrated their inadequacy under pressure. "I don't understand," Elena said. "A partnership doing what?" David was about to explain opportunities that would transform Elena's understanding of what was possible when talent, character, and strategic resources were combined effectively. But first, he needed to help her understand that her greatest apparent failure had actually revealed exactly the qualities that made her perfect for challenges she had never imagined herself capable of handling. David leaned forward in his chair, his expression becoming more focused as he prepared to explain opportunities that Elena couldn't have imagined existing in her current world of economic uncertainty and professional isolation. But before he could begin outlining his vision for their potential partnership, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the mall corridor, accompanied by the sharp clicking of high heels against polished concrete. Brittany Chen appeared at the entrance to Precision Timepieces, her clipboard clutched tightly in one hand and her smartphone in the other, clearly agitated about something that demanded immediate attention. She stopped abruptly when she noticed David sitting across from Elena's workbench, her expression shifting from administrative urgency to the kind of forced professionalism she reserved for people whose opinions might affect her career prospects. "Mr. Mitchell," Brittany said, her voice carrying the artificially bright tone she used when trying to manage situations that felt beyond her control. "I didn't realize you were visiting our tenants this morning. Is there anything I can help you with?" David recognized Brittany from previous property management meetings, though their interactions had been limited to brief discussions about operational issues and tenant relations. He had noticed that she approached her responsibilities with an emphasis on regulatory compliance and cost control rather than customer service or business development, but he hadn't yet formed definitive opinions about her judgment or capabilities. "Good. Morning, Brittany," David replied calmly. "I'm here as a customer today, having Ms. Rodriguez examine a vintage timepiece that requires specialized restoration." Brittany's eyes widened slightly as she processed the implications of David's statement. The CEO of the company that owned the mall was personally seeking services from one of the businesses that she had been systematically documenting for closure and redevelopment. This created complications for the narrative she had been building about small businesses that provided outdated services to economically insignificant customer bases. "Of course," Brittany said, though her tone suggested uncertainty about how to handle this unexpected development. "I hope Ms. Rodriguez is providing the level of service that meets your expectations." Elena felt her stomach clench as she realized that Brittany's presence meant that her accident with David's watch might become public knowledge among the mall's administrative staff. If Brittany learned about the damaged crystal, she would undoubtedly include the incident in her reports to upper management, using Elena's mistake as evidence that small businesses posed risks and liabilities that justified accelerating their removal from the property. "Ms. Rodriguez has been exceptional," David said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that discouraged further questioning. "Her expertise and professionalism are exactly what I was hoping to find." Brittany nodded, enthusiastically, though Elena could see confusion and calculation in her expression as she tried to reconcile David's positive assessment with her own predetermined conclusions about the watch repair business and its suitability for the mall's future development. "I'm so glad to hear that," Brittany said. "Of course, with the upcoming transition, we've been working to ensure that all our tenants understand the timeline and requirements for the property's redevelopment. I hope the closure won't interfere with any ongoing projects you might have with Ms. Rodriguez." Elena felt a surge of panic as Brittany's words reminded everyone present that her professional future was scheduled to end in just over 2 weeks. Whatever partnership David had been preparing to offer would be irrelevant if she no longer had a workspace or any means of continuing her connection to watch repair. David's expression didn't change, but Elena noticed a subtle shift in his posture. That suggested he was paying closer attention to Brittany's comments and the assumptions underlying her approach to tenant relations. "Actually," David said, "that's something I wanted to discuss. What can you tell me about the current status of lease renewals and business relocations for our remaining tenants?" Brittany straightened, clearly pleased to have an opportunity to demonstrate her administrative competence and strategic thinking to someone whose opinion could influence her own career advancement. "We've been very proactive about managing the transition process," Brittany said, consulting her clipboard. "Most of our tenants have been notified about the closure timeline, and we've provided resources to help them identify alternative locations that might be suitable for their operations." David waited for Brittany to continue, but when she remained silent, he asked a more specific question that revealed his interest in details rather than general policies. "What about businesses that have built specialized customer bases or require unique operational capabilities?" David asked. "Are we providing any additional support for tenants whose services might be difficult to replicate in standard retail environments?" Brittany hesitated, clearly uncertain how to explain her approach without revealing that she had been actively discouraging rather than supporting the continuation of businesses like precision timepieces. "Well," Brittany said carefully, "we've tried to be realistic about which businesses are likely to succeed in the current retail environment. Some of our tenants provide services that are becoming less relevant as consumer preferences shift toward convenience and digital solutions." Elena felt her face flush with embarrassment as Brittany's words made it clear that her work was viewed as obsolete rather than specialized, irrelevant rather than valuable to customers who appreciated traditional craftsmanship. David's expression remained neutral, but his next question carried an edge that suggested he was beginning to form opinions about Brittany's judgment and priorities. "Can you give me specific examples of how we've supported tenants who provide specialized services?" David asked. "What resources have we offered to help businesses like Precision Timepieces transition to new locations or adapt their operations for changing market conditions?" Brittany's confidence began to waver as she realized that David's questions were exposing gaps in her support for tenants rather than confirming her strategic approach to property management. We've provided information about available commercial spaces and connected tenants with real estate professionals who specialize in small business relocations," Brittany said, her voice losing some of its earlier certainty. "And what about businesses that have built regional reputations or serve customers from across the metropolitan area?" David continued. "Have we made any efforts to understand the economic impact of displacing specialized services that might be difficult for customers to replace?" Elena was surprised to hear David asking questions that suggested he understood the broader implications of closing businesses like Precision Timepieces. She had assumed that property developers viewed small businesses primarily as obstacles to more profitable land uses rather than as economic assets that provided value to regional communities. Brittany was clearly struggling to respond to David's questions in ways that would support her previous recommendations without admitting that she had failed to consider the factors he was raising. I think, Brittany said slowly, that our primary responsibility has been to the property owners and investors who depend on us to maximize the value of their assets. While we certainly want to be fair to existing tenants, we also have to be realistic about which businesses are viable in the long term. David nodded thoughtfully, but Elena could see that he was processing Brittany's response as evidence of something rather than simply accepting her explanation at face value. "Brittany," David said, "I'd like you to prepare a detailed report about our tenant transition process. Specifically, I want to understand what research we've done about customer bases, regional economic impact, and the availability of alternative service providers for businesses that we're displacing." Brittany's face went pale as she realized that David was requesting documentation that would reveal the superficial nature of her analysis and her failure to consider factors that a more thorough evaluation would have included. "Of course," Brittany said, though her voice suggested she was beginning to understand that her approach to tenant relations might not align with David's expectations or priorities. "When would you like me to have that information ready?" "End of business tomorrow," David replied. "I'll also want to review any customer feedback or community input we've received about the businesses that are being displaced." Elena watched this exchange with growing amazement. David was asking questions that suggested he viewed her work as valuable rather than obsolete, important rather than irrelevant to the economic health of the community that the mall served. She had never imagined that someone in his position would consider the impact of business closures on customers who depended on specialized services. "I should let you get back to your consultation," Brittany said, clearly eager to escape a conversation that was creating more problems than solutions. For her position, "Please let me know if there's anything else I can do to support your needs." After Brittany left, David sat quietly for several moments, processing what he had learned about the property management approach that had been determining the fate of businesses like precision timepieces. Elena waited nervously, uncertain whether the conversation with Brittany had changed David's assessment of her situation or his interest in the partnership he had been preparing to propose. "Elena," David said finally, "what Brittany just told us about the transition process doesn't surprise me, but it does confirm some concerns I've had about how we've been managing this property." Elena wasn't sure what response David expected, so she remained silent while he gathered his thoughts about the larger implications of what they had just witnessed. "One of the things I learned in the military," David continued, "is that organizations often fail not because they lack talented people, but because they don't create systems that identify and develop talent effectively. What we just saw is an example of management that focuses on short-term metrics rather than long-term value creation." David paused, looking directly at Elena with an expression that was both serious and encouraging. "You've built something here that most businesses spend years trying to achieve," David said. "Customer loyalty, regional reputation, specialized expertise that can't be easily replicated or replaced. Those are assets that smart organizations invest in rather than eliminate." Elena felt a surge of hope mixed with disbelief. After months of being told that her work was becoming irrelevant, that traditional craftsmanship had no place in modern retail environments, someone with real authority was suggesting that her skills and customer relationships actually represented valuable business assets. "But I'm still going to lose my workspace in 2 weeks, Elena said, voicing the reality that made David's encouragement feel more like consolation than genuine opportunity. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about," David replied. "What if I told you that the closure of this mall doesn't have to mean the end of your business? What if it could actually be the beginning of something much better?" Elena stared at David, unable to imagine how the destruction of her workspace could lead to better opportunities, especially given her lack of financial resources and professional connections that might help her rebuild elsewhere. I've been developing plans for this property that go far beyond the conventional redevelopment that Brittany and others have been assuming, David explained. Instead of demolishing everything and starting over, I want to create something that honors the best of what already exists while adding new capabilities that can serve broader communities. David gestured toward the empty corridors and closed storefronts that surrounded Elena's small workspace. This mall is dying because it's trying to compete with online shopping and big box stores that offer convenience and low prices, David said. But there's a different model that focuses on experiences and expertise that customers can't access through digital channels. Elena was beginning to understand that David's vision involved preserving rather than eliminating businesses like precision timepieces, but she couldn't yet see how such a plan could be financially viable in a marketplace that seemed to reward efficiency over craftsmanship. I want to transform this property into an artisan marketplace, David continued. A destination where people can watch skilled craftspeople at work, learn traditional techniques, and purchase services that require genuine expertise rather than automated production. David's enthusiasm for his vision was evident, but Elena was still struggling to understand how someone like her could fit into plans that probably required significant capital investment and business experience that she completely lacked. Elena, you wouldn't just be a tenant in this new environment, David said. You would be a founding partner, someone who helps design how the marketplace operates and what kinds of experiences we provide for customers who value quality and authenticity. Elena felt her heart racing as she began to comprehend the magnitude of what David was proposing. He wasn't just offering her a new workspace, he was suggesting that she could play a leadership role in creating an entirely new type of business environment. I don't understand, Elena said. What would a partnership like that actually involve? What would I be expected to contribute besides watch repair services? David smiled, recognizing that Elena was beginning to engage with possibilities that went far beyond anything she had previously considered for her professional future. Your expertise, your customer relationships, and your understanding of what makes traditional craftsmanship valuable in a world that often prioritizes speed over quality, David replied. But also your insights about how to create educational experiences, how to build trust with customers who are investing in services they don't fully understand, and how to develop the next generation of craftspeople who can carry these traditions forward. Elena was overwhelmed by David's confidence in her potential contributions to projects that seemed far more complex and ambitious than anything she felt qualified to handle. But she was also beginning to feel excited about possibilities that honored her father's legacy, while creating opportunities to impact communities in ways she had never imagined. David could see that Elena was struggling to process the scope of what he was proposing, so he decided to provide more concrete details about how their partnership might actually function in practical terms. Let me show you something, David said, pulling out his smartphone and opening a folder containing architectural renderings and business plans that would help Elena visualize the future he was describing. David scrolled through his phone until he found the architectural renderings he wanted to share, then turned the screen toward Elena so she could see detailed drawings of what Desert Ridge Shopping Center might become under his transformative vision. The images showed spaces that bore little resemblance to the dying mall where they currently sat, featuring open workshops with floor-to-ceiling windows, demonstration areas where customers could observe craftspeople at work, and educational facilities designed for hands-on learning experiences. This is the watchmaking studio I've been designing, David said, pointing to a rendering that showed a workspace 3 times larger than Elena's current booth, equipped with professional-grade tools, multiple repair stations, and a climate-controlled environment optimized for precision mechanical work. The space would include areas for customer consultations, educational demonstrations, and advanced restoration projects that require specialized equipment. Elena stared at the images, hardly able to believe that someone had been planning a workspace specifically designed around the kind of work she loved. The rendered studio included features she had only dreamed about: proper ventilation systems for chemical cleaning processes, adjustable lighting that could be calibrated for different types of detailed work, and storage solutions that would allow her to organize tools and parts with the precision that complex repairs demanded. The customer area would allow people to watch you work if they wanted to understand what's involved in restoring their timepieces. David continued, showing Elena additional drawings that depicted comfortable seating areas positioned to provide clear views of the main workbench without interfering with the repair process. But it would also include private consultation spaces for customers who prefer to discuss family histories and sentimental attachments without feeling like they're performing for an audience. Elena noticed details in the renderings that revealed David's understanding of both the technical requirements of watch repair and the emotional dynamics that made customer relationships so important to her work. The design included display cases for showcasing completed restorations, reference libraries for research and documentation, and even a small kitchenette where customers could be offered coffee while waiting for assessments of complex repair projects. The educational component would be entirely under your control, David explained, showing Elena drawings of classroom spaces equipped with multiple workstations where students could learn basic watchmaking techniques under her guidance. You could offer weekend workshops for hobbyists, longer courses for people seriously interested in developing professional skills, or specialized programs for veterans who might benefit from the therapeutic aspects of precision mechanical work. Elena felt tears forming as she realized that David had been thinking about ways to honor her father's military service while creating opportunities for other veterans to experience the same sense of purpose and accomplishment that she found in restoring timepieces to working condition. The idea of teaching military families about horology felt like a perfect way to extend Roberto Rodriguez's legacy, while serving communities that understood the value of precision, reliability, and attention to detail. But Elena, David said, his tone becoming more serious as he prepared to explain the broader context of his proposal. This partnership would involve much more than just providing you with better workspace and equipment. I would need you to help me understand how to create similar opportunities for other craftspeople who possess specialized skills that are being overlooked by conventional retail environments. David scrolled to additional renderings that showed workshops for leather crafting, jewelry making, furniture restoration, and other traditional trades that required years of training and experience to master properly. The overall design created a marketplace where customers could access expertise and services that were disappearing from most commercial environments, while also providing educational opportunities for people interested in learning traditional skills. Each workshop would be operated by a master craftsperson who would serve as both a business partner and an advisor for developing the overall marketplace, David explained. You wouldn't just be running your own studio, you would be helping to design policies, customer experience standards, and educational programs that would serve the entire artisan community. Elena was beginning to understand that David's vision required her to develop leadership and business management skills that went far beyond her current expertise in watch repair. The prospect was both exciting and terrifying, offering opportunities for professional growth that she had never considered, while also demanding capabilities that she wasn't certain she possessed. "I've never managed anything larger than my own workspace," Elena said honestly. "I've never developed business policies or designed educational programs. What makes you think I could handle responsibilities like that?" David had been expecting Elena's concerns about her qualifications for leadership roles, and he was prepared to explain why her technical expertise and character were more important foundations for business partnership than conventional management experience. "Elena, the military taught me that the best leaders are often people who understand their work at the deepest possible level and care more about excellence than recognition," David replied. "You've spent 3 years building customer relationships based on trust, delivering services that exceed expectations, and solving problems that other professionals couldn't handle. Those are exactly the qualities that create successful business partnerships." David paused, thinking about his own transition from military service to civilian business leadership, and the lessons he had learned about identifying potential in people who might not recognize their own capabilities. "More importantly," David continued, "you understand what it means to work with precision under pressure, to take responsibility for outcomes that matter to other people, and to maintain high standards even when no one is watching. Those are leadership qualities that can't be taught in business school." Elena was surprised by David's confidence in her potential for business leadership, but she was also beginning to recognize that her experiences at Precision Timepieces had required many of the same skills that would be necessary for managing larger operations and more complex relationships. "What would the timeline look like for something like this?" Elena asked, beginning to engage seriously with David's proposal despite her uncertainties about her qualifications. "The architectural planning and permits would take approximately 6 months, David replied. "Construction and build-out would require another 8 to 10 months. We could be opening the first phase of the artisan marketplace about 18 months from now." Elena felt a moment of disappointment as she realized that David's timeline wouldn't help her address the immediate crisis of losing her workspace in 2 weeks. Even if she wanted to accept his partnership offer, she would still face more than a year of unemployment and disconnection from the work that gave her life meaning and purpose. David noticed Elena's reaction and quickly addressed the concern that he had anticipated would arise from his long-term development timeline. "Elena, I should have mentioned that the partnership would begin immediately, not when the new facility opens," David said. "I want you to be involved in every stage of the planning and development process, which means you would start working as a paid consultant while we design and build your dream workshop." Elena looked at David with surprise and growing hope. She had assumed that any partnership would require her to find alternative employment for the interim period. But David was suggesting that she could begin earning income from their collaboration even before the new facility was constructed. "What would consulting work involve?" Elena asked. "Helping me understand the technical requirements for professional watchmaking facilities, advising on equipment purchases and workspace design, developing curriculum for educational programs, and identifying other craftspeople who might be good candidates for partnership in the marketplace," David explained. David pulled up additional documents on his phone, showing Elena preliminary budgets and timeline charts that outlined the various stages of the development project and the roles she could play throughout the process. "You would also travel with me to visit other artisan marketplaces and craft education facilities," David continued. "I want to learn from the best examples of what works and what doesn't in similar projects, and I need someone with your expertise to help me evaluate what we see." Elena was amazed by the scope of opportunities that David was describing. She had never traveled outside Arizona except for brief trips to visit foster families in neighboring states, and the idea of visiting other cities to study craftsman workshops felt like adventures she had never dared to imagine for herself. During the development phase, You would also maintain a temporary workspace where you could continue serving your existing customers while we build the permanent facility, David added. I've already identified several locations that could provide appropriate interim space, including a historic building downtown that has beautiful natural light and would be perfect for watch repair work. Elena felt overwhelmed by the generosity and thoughtfulness of David's proposal. He had anticipated every concern she might have about maintaining her current work while transitioning to new opportunities, and he had developed solutions that would allow her to continue honoring her commitments to customers while expanding her professional capabilities. David, Elena said, using his first name for the first time since learning his identity. This sounds incredible, but I have to ask about the financial aspects. I don't have money to invest in a partnership, and I couldn't afford to repay loans for equipment or facility development. David smiled, recognizing that Elena's concerns about financial obligations revealed both practical thinking and the kind of integrity that made her an ideal business partner. Elena, you would be contributing expertise, customer relationships, and intellectual property that are worth far more than cash investment, David replied. The financial backing for this project comes from my development company and investment partners who understand the long-term value of creating unique retail destinations. David showed Elena financial projections that outlined how revenue would be shared between partners, how operational costs would be managed, and what kinds of income she could expect to earn as both a craftsperson and a business advisor. Your compensation would include a base salary for consulting work, revenue sharing from your watch repair services, and equity participation in the overall marketplace as it grows and develops, David explained. The goal is to create sustainable income that allows you to focus on excellent craftsmanship without worrying about financial survival. Elena studied the financial projections, hardly able to believe that someone was offering her the kind of economic security that would allow her to develop her skills and serve customers without the constant anxiety about rent, utilities, and basic survival expenses that had dominated her life since aging out of foster care. There's one more thing I want to discuss, David said, his expression becoming more personal as he prepared to share information that would help Elena understand the deeper motivations behind his partnership offer. My grandfather's watch, the one you've been examining today, isn't just a family heirloom, David continued. It's the reason I started thinking about the importance of preserving traditional crafts and supporting people who understand the value of things made to last. David explained that his grandfather had worn the A11 chronograph during bombing missions over the Pacific, relying on its precision timing for navigation calculations that could mean the difference between successful missions and catastrophic failures. After the war, Colonel James Mitchell had continued wearing the watch throughout his civilian career as an engineer, eventually passing it to David's father with stories about the importance of reliability, precision, and attention to detail. When the watch stopped working last year, I took it to 3 different repair shops, David said. Each one told me that it was too old, too complicated, or too expensive to restore properly. They suggested I buy a modern watch that would be more reliable and easier to maintain. David paused, thinking about his frustration with professionals who couldn't see the value in preserving something that represented family history, military service, and generational connections that couldn't be replaced with newer alternatives. That's when I started researching traditional crafts and the people who still understand how to work with vintage items that require specialized knowledge, David continued. Your name kept appearing in forums and recommendations from people who appreciate quality restoration rather than convenient replacement. Elena was beginning to understand that David's partnership offer wasn't just a business opportunity. It was part of a larger mission to preserve skills and traditions that were disappearing from modern economic environments. Elena, I believe, That people like you represent something essential that our economy is losing, David said. The ability to repair rather than replace, to maintain traditions that connect us to previous generations, and to provide services that require genuine expertise rather than automated efficiency. Elena felt deeply moved by David's recognition of the broader significance of her work. She had always known that watch repair connected her to her father's legacy, but she hadn't realized that someone might view her skills as part of a larger cultural preservation effort that deserved support and investment. If I said yes to this partnership, Elena asked, when would we begin working together? David smiled, recognizing that Elena's question indicated genuine interest in accepting his proposal despite her uncertainties about her qualifications for business leadership. We could start immediately, David replied. In fact, I'd like you to take the rest of this week to visit the temporary workspace I mentioned and begin thinking about what equipment we should order for your interim facility. Elena felt her heart racing as she realized that David was offering her the chance to begin a completely new phase of her professional life within days rather than months or years. The opportunity to escape the anxiety of impending unemployment while building toward a future that honored her father's legacy felt almost too good to be true. David, Elena said, I want to say yes, but I feel like I should mention that I have no idea how to be a business partner. I've never made decisions that affect other people's livelihoods or contributed to projects that involve significant financial investment. David understood Elena's concerns, but he also recognized that her awareness of what she didn't know was itself a qualification for partnership with someone who could provide complementary expertise and experience. Elena, the most important thing you can contribute is exactly what you've been doing for 3 years, David replied. Excellence in your craft, honesty with customers, and commitment to doing the right thing even when it's difficult. Everything else can be learned as we work together. Elena looked down at the damaged watch in her hands, thinking about the accident that had led to this extraordinary conversation and the unexpected opportunities that had emerged from what she had initially viewed as a career-ending mistake. David, Elena said, meeting his eyes with a mixture of gratitude and determination, I would be honored to accept your partnership offer. David's smile was immediate and genuine as he extended his hand to shake Elena's, sealing a partnership that would transform both of their lives in ways neither could fully anticipate. But as their hands met across the workbench scattered with tiny watch components, Elena suddenly remembered the cracked crystal that had started this entire conversation. Wait, Elena said, looking down at the damaged A11 chronograph. We still haven't resolved what happened to your grandfather's watch. David chuckled, picking up the timepiece and examining the hairline crack that had caused Elena so much distress. Actually, I think this crack might be the most valuable thing that's ever happened to this watch. Elena looked at him with confusion, unable to understand how damage to an irreplaceable family heirloom could be considered valuable. A development project and the roles she could play throughout the process. You would also travel with me to visit other artisan marketplaces and craft education facilities, David continued. I want to learn from the best examples of what works and what doesn't in similar projects, and I need someone with your expertise to help me evaluate what we see. Elena, this watch survived World War II, but it took meeting you to teach me what I really needed to learn about recognizing potential, David explained. The crack isn't damage, it's evidence of the moment when both of our futures changed for the better. David carefully placed the watch back in its case, but instead of closing it, he made an unexpected decision. I want you to keep this watch, David said, not to repair it immediately, but to restore it in your new workshop when everything is perfect. It can be the first official project of our partnership, and when it's complete, it will represent everything we've built together. Elena felt tears forming as she realized that David was entrusting her not just with his family's most precious heirloom, but with a symbol of faith in their shared future that went far beyond any business arrangement. 6 months later, Elena stood in her new temporary workshop in downtown Phoenix, carefully installing the final component in Colonel James Mitchell's restored A11 chronograph. The workspace David had found for her was everything he had promised: a bright, airy studio in a renovated historic building where natural light streamed through tall windows and customers could watch her work while enjoying coffee from the artisan. Cafe downstairs. The past months had been a whirlwind of learning and growth that had stretched Elena's capabilities in directions she had never imagined. She had traveled to craft schools in North Carolina, artisan markets in Santa Fe, and traditional workshops in Switzerland, studying how master craftspeople combined technical excellence with educational outreach and community building. Elena had also been working with David to recruit other artisans for their marketplace, interviewing leather workers, jewelry makers, furniture restorers, and textile artists who shared her commitment to traditional crafts and authentic customer relationships. Each conversation had taught her more about business development, partnership negotiation, and the leadership skills that would be essential for their venture's success. But perhaps most surprisingly, Elena had discovered that she possessed natural talents for teaching and communication that had been hidden beneath her shyness in conventional social situations. When discussing her craft with students or customers who genuinely wanted to learn, Elena found herself becoming animated and articulate in ways that felt completely authentic to who she was. Her Saturday morning watchmaking workshops had become so popular that she maintained a waiting list 3 months long. Veterans and their families made up a significant portion of her students, drawn by Elena's understanding of military timepieces and her father's story of service and sacrifice. Ruth Williams had become a regular visitor to Elena's new workshop, bringing tea and encouragement while watching her young protégé develop into the kind of leader and educator that the older woman had always believed she could become. "Your father would be so proud," Ruth had told Elena during a recent visit, "not just of your technical skills, but of the way you're helping other people discover their own potential." As Elena completed the final adjustments to Colonel Mitchell's chronograph, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that Thursday morning when a cracked crystal had seemed like the end of her world. The damaged watch had become a bridge to opportunities she never could have imagined, proving that sometimes our greatest failures are actually the universe's way of redirecting us toward destinies we were meant to fulfill. Elena wound the restored A11 and held it to her ear, listening to the steady tick that confirmed the movement was keeping perfect time. Tomorrow, she would present the completed restoration to David at the groundbreaking ceremony for the Desert Ridge Artisan Marketplace, where they would officially begin construction of the permanent facility that would house their expanding community of traditional craftspeople. The marketplace was already generating national attention from urban planners and retail developers who were interested in replicating David and Elena's model in other cities. Elena had been invited to speak at conferences about combining traditional crafts with modern business practices, sharing her story with audiences who were inspired by the transformation of a shy young woman into a confident leader and educator. Brittany. Chen had resigned from her position at Southwestern Commercial Properties 3 months earlier, accepting a job with a conventional retail development company that better suited her approach to property management. Her replacement, Carlos Rodriguez, was a veteran who understood the value of supporting small businesses and building community relationships rather than simply maximizing short-term profits. Elena carefully placed the restored chronograph in a custom presentation case she had designed specifically for this moment. Tomorrow's ceremony would mark not just the beginning of construction, but the culmination of a journey that had transformed her understanding of what was possible when talent met opportunity and courage met support. As Elena locked her workshop and walked through the quiet downtown streets toward her apartment, she thought about all the young people who might be working in small corners of dying shopping centers, convinced that their quiet competence would never be recognized or valued by the larger world. Elena's story proves that authenticity isn't a weakness in a world that celebrates performance. It's a superpower that creates connections and opportunities that can't be manufactured or imitated. Her willingness to take responsibility for her mistakes, to prioritize others' needs over her own protection, and to speak passionately about work that mattered to her, had attracted exactly the kind of recognition and support that transforms lives and communities. Sometimes the doors we think are wrong turn out to be exactly right. Sometimes the mistakes that make us feel most vulnerable become the bridges to futures we never dared to imagine. Elena's journey reminds us that excellence combined with integrity creates its own opportunities, often in ways that surprise us with their timing and scope. Your quiet strength might be exactly what someone somewhere is looking for. Your technical skills, your attention to detail, your commitment to doing excellent work even when no one seems to notice. These qualities create value that smart people recognize and support. If Elena's story resonates with you, if you've ever felt overlooked because you prefer substance over self-promotion, remember that the right opportunities often come disguised as disasters. The crack in the crystal might actually be the light getting in. Don't underestimate the power of honest vulnerability in a world full of performance. Don't assume that your technical competence isn't valuable because it doesn't make noise. Most importantly, don't give up on work that matters to you just because conventional systems don't seem to recognize its worth. The universe has a way of putting people exactly where they need to be, often through circumstances that initially feel like failures. Your wrong door might be waiting for you to knock on it. If this story inspired you to see your own potential differently, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the power of authentic excellence. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their quiet competence is exactly what the world has been waiting for. Your story matters. Your skills matter. Your integrity under pressure matters. The right partnership is looking for someone exactly like you, and sometimes it arrives in the most unexpected ways. The world needs more people like Elena, people who understand that true success isn't about winning competitions, but about creating value that makes other people's lives better. People who know that the most important work often happens quietly, in small spaces, one careful repair at a time. Your moment is coming. Are you ready to embrace it when your crystal cracks and everything changes forever?